first question that I had for you from a member is, the current situation has involved unprecedented spending by our government in addition to a substantial drop in revenues. What action is the government considering in order to start to move the national debt level back to normal, i.e., what level of taxation can businesses and people expect to see?
So first of all, what I would remind everyone is there's no question over the last, I wasn't part of it from 2015 to 2019, but our government did run deficits in a way to invest in Canadians, whether it was through infrastructure or social spending. You know, unemployment was at an all-time, no, I don't want to say an all-time low, it was a 40-year low. We hadn't had unemployment that low since 1976. So certainly I think the investments were beneficial during the time. Obviously, right now, we've spent almost the equivalent of a year's budget to try to address the pandemic that we're all seeing. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find too many Canadians that would suggest that that wasn't a prudent measure to try to protect businesses, to make sure that they didn't go bankrupt, to try to provide liquidity in the market for those businesses that are facing challenges, and indeed Canadians across the board. The big question, of course, is what we do afterwards, and those I would argue are conversations we're having internally right now in terms of what comes after COVID-19. Once we are able to actually either have a vaccine in place or start to loosen up the economy, which is, I still think a number of months down, I don't want to say a number of months, but a number of weeks down the road, we as a government are asking ourselves, is it infrastructure spending? Is it a bit of liquidity to ensure that businesses still have the help they need? Is it sectoral specific? And those are conversations that are ongoing. Certainly I can say from my perspective, I do believe that a lot of this spending is temporary in nature. And we're going to have to ask ourselves the question as a government is, when we go into the next election, how do we manage ourselves out of this? And so I certainly appreciate the question. And in my mind, some of our spending, of course, is going to have to be reined in because it is not feasible to continue this type of spending. But I don't think any government would suggest that would be the plan moving forward.
Okay, thanks, Kody. So the next question that we have here has a few parts to it, but the thrust of the question is, due to the urgency of the almost universal spending that has occurred, there has been no time spent evaluating the actual needs of businesses or individuals who are accessing these funds. So the parts are, how will the government determine what businesses and individuals can have their assistance clawed back, and will the government be clawing them back?
I guess what I would say is a lot of our programs are built in trying to assess need. There are some, of course, like the emergency business account that's available to businesses based on their payroll and not necessarily on a particular decline in their overall business activity. Those were being put out in addition to some of the work that was done around Export Development Canada with credit facilities to ensure liquidity in the market. In terms of individuals, it's been made clear that, well, in fact, it's a criminal offense if in terms of you're found lying in terms of accessing benefits. So there will be auditing on the other side to ensure that individuals that are accessing, whether it's CERB or some of the other ones that are required to apply, whether or not they actually met that threshold. In terms of businesses themselves, in terms of clawing back, you know, I don't think that there's necessarily anything in place. There will be, there's provisions under the emergency wage subsidy that says that if businesses are somehow found to be, I guess I'll say, working their numbers in a way that would be advantageous, then they could be found to be penalized in those circumstances. But really the focus at this point is getting out support to Canadians that need the help. Businesses need the liquidity. We want to be able to keep small businesses operating to the extent that we can. We can't bankroll the entire private economy, but we're certainly doing our best to make sure that people have the support that they need.
Okay, thank you, Kody. So the next question that we have here is about the gig economy, which has gained popularity and traction the past few years. So the current situation has exposed a huge gap in the economy between those that are classified as employees and those in the gig economy or other sole proprietors. The government has not allowed these people to pay into EI. Will this policy now be adjusted for the future, or allow this group to have a special programming, and what other steps will be taken to ensure that this group contributes to some sort of fund similar to EI?
And Amy, just before I ask, before I go, is the feedback a little bit better now?
Yes. I think
Okay.
maybe just speak a bit slowly. I'm not sure why we're getting a little bit of feedback from it, but I think maybe when you speed up, that's when we're having problems.
Okay, well, I certainly appreciate the question. I mean, this is one of the things that our government grappled with the emergency response benefit. Was it was clear that there was individuals that were going to need support, that were losing their job, that were self-employed, that would not otherwise be eligible through EI. And that's in large part why the emergency response benefit was created, was to ensure that individuals that did not contribute in that manner still had some type of support. And certainly had heard from a lot of individuals that were in those situations that were self-employed about whether or not they would qualify. We had a lot of small businesses that said, look, whether they were micro businesses, sole proprietors, or maybe they had one staff, they said, you know, I might make $2,000 or $3,000 a month. I'm now making $250 a month or $500 a month. I don't qualify for the CERB. And as a result, you know, I'm forced to make the decision between whether or not I close my business to collect the benefit because of COVID-19, or do I try to keep mitigating my losses? So I guess what I would say, you know, we recognize that as it relates to kind of self-employed individuals and their ability to access the CERB and still make up to $1,000 a month. The question around broader policies in the days ahead about contribution from self-employed individuals into a particular fund, I guess what I would say is those conversations very well could be welcomed. You know, if there's a particular member that asked it, happy for them to follow up with me individually, and we can have those conversations, because you know, maybe those are things that we should be looking at as a government in the days ahead.
Okay, thank you, Kody. So for companies and individuals that do not or cannot avail themselves of the universal assistance that is currently available, will the government be looking at some sort of downstream incentive? And I know that you've touched on this a little bit, but you can just speak to that a bit more.
Sure. Look, we know, despite the fact that we've rolled out unprecedented amount of social spending to try to support businesses and individuals alike, there still are gaps. And as I mentioned, our government will be looking down the road in terms of what needs to come next. In terms of incentives, I think that there's an opportunity, particularly in the hospitality and tourism sector, to provide tax credits in terms of trying to incentivize Canadians to maybe get out to tourism destinations domestically. I don't have a crystal ball about where this is all headed, but I would suggest that, you know, international travel will be dampened, at least for probably a 24-month period, until this is completely quelled. And so if we do get to the point that public health officials are allowing for domestic travel or interprovincial travel, I think tax credits that are going to be incentivized to get businesses to change behavior, or not businesses, individuals to change behavior, to get out and support local businesses or businesses that are most impacted as a result of COVID-19 would be beneficial. You know, there's still, what I would argue, sectoral considerations. We need a functioning airline after this is all said and done. We know how impacted they are right now. Living in East Hants, we know how many people are employed at the international airport and make their livelihoods there. So I think that you will see, despite our best efforts for broad sector policies, there still may be some sectoral benefits to try to, whether it is downstream or currently, to try to make sure that we can stabilize those industries.
Okay, thank you, Kody. So the next question is, when we emerge from this crisis, we will need a strong statement that this current situation is absolutely unique and that bailouts will not continue indefinitely. Is this a statement that your government is prepared to make?
I guess what I would say is all of this is unprecedented. You know, our government didn't walk into 2020 expecting this to necessarily happen. And really at this point, our government will be looking at ways to try to congeal and make sure that we have liquidity for businesses. The alternative simply would have been to not intervene and to see small businesses across the board and large businesses suffer hardship, and the economic consequences would have been very grave. So I guess what I would say, speaking as a member of Parliament for the governing party and not necessarily a member of the executive, our government will be looking at ways in which we need to get back to more of a fiscal footing. It is not sustainable to run $200 billion plus deficits a year. We know that, and I don't think any Canadian is expecting that to happen. So as it relates to bailouts writ large for industry, you know, I know that those conversations are ongoing internally about what sectors may need even more specific help, as opposed to a bailout. Just what can we do for sectors like tourism, hospitalities, other businesses that are built around bringing people together, which is obviously not possible during this time.